On today's episode, how to not die at World's Toughest Mudder 2018, hypothermia, with Molly Kenneth. This is the World's Toughest Podcast. Welcome to the World's Toughest Podcast, where we talk about any obstacle course race you'd like, as long as that's World's Toughest Mudder. Each week we talk to members of the WTM community and share stories of success and failure in the single greatest event in OCR. My name is Will Hicks, and this is the World's Toughest Podcast. Welcome back to World's Toughest Podcast. My name is Will Hicks. Thank you for listening to the number one rated obstacle course racing podcast in the world. Because of listeners like you, you are too kind. As I record this, it is Thursday night before World's Toughest Mudder. We are in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is cold. Today on the show, we're going to talk with Molly Kenneth about how to not die at World's Toughest Mudder, hypothermia. We've talked with Molly before about how to not die regarding overhydration. It is going to be cold this weekend, I promise you. I'm looking at the weather report. Friday, it's going to rain. 80% chance of rain. 95% humidity. Saturday, it's going to be sunny, but temperature on Saturday, 51 of a high, 33 degrees of a low. A low of 33 degrees. It is going to be cold. It will be so cold. Do not get hurt. Do not get hypothermia. Before we start, you can email me at willhicks@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at TheWillHicks. And you can follow the show on Instagram at World's Toughest Podcast. If you're following the race this weekend at home, you want to check out Tough Mudder's Facebook Live, and you want to check out World's Toughest Podcast's Instagram. Go to Instagram, search for World's Toughest Podcast, and follow along in the stories and in the feed. Carlo Piscatello of the world-famous Piss and Cock Show will be handling our media duties this weekend. Don't forget to leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts. Click that purple podcast app. Search for World's Toughest Podcast. Click our logo, scroll down, and click Write a Review. And I would be grateful for that. I will see you tomorrow at registration. Today at registration, maybe. Maybe you're listening on the way to registration right now. Tell me if you are. Tell me if you did. And Saturday on the course. We're going to talk about hypothermia in a minute here with Molly Kenneth. But before we do, I want to reiterate something I've said before. I am not a doctor, and I am not your mother. You are responsible for your health and your safety. Not me, not Molly Kenneth, not World's Toughest Podcast, not Tough Mudder. You are responsible for your health and safety. If you have any questions about hypothermia or your health and safety, you should check with your personal physician before you attempt World's Toughest Mudder. It's time to talk with Molly Kenneth. Let's go to the phones. Molly Kenneth, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Will.
Molly, we've talked on the show before about medical topics as they relate to World's Toughest Mudder, but for new listeners, what are your medical qualifications?
So I'm a nurse practitioner in California. I work in the primary care setting and urgent care. Nurse practitioner is something called a mid-level provider, along with physician assistant. We can diagnose and prescribe for treat illnesses and do stitches and work in hospitals, work in clinics, work in doctors' offices. It varies by state what we can do and not do, but a pretty broad, pretty solid job.
What are your plans for World's Toughest this year?
So this year is interesting because Toughest West and that whole weekend in NorCal was like a really good precursor. I went into that weekend, registered for Worlds, and felt great. And I had just done a marathon the month before and feeling really solid. And I got out on the course on Saturday and didn't feel as solid, got pretty well beat up. And by the end of the day, I decided, okay, I'm not gonna run tomorrow. I'll just do whatever. So Sunday, I started the course with Diana, sort of kicked her off, and then I did the course backwards, cheering for people on the spectator route, and it was so fun. It was a really great time. And then, like, a couple hours after that, I went in and I worked for medical, And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a combination of probably do medical overnight, and then I'll be the loud person on the course cheering for you at other times.
That sounds like fun.
It's really fun.
So we've talked before about how to not die at World's Toughest Mudder. Today we're going to talk about hypothermia. What is hypothermia?
So hypothermia, you start out, it's kind of a broad term. When it's July and you're in your tank top and your shorts and you go through Arctic enema and you start shivering, that is not hypothermia. That's called cold stress. So you take a warm body and you expose the skin to rapidly cool down the skin really fast, and it has cold stress, but you're really recovering. Like, you're fine. It's not hypothermia. Hypothermia is when you actually have a recognizable decrease in core body temperature. The body is amazing at keeping it solid within a range of like 98.6 plus or minus 0.9 degrees. I mean, really, we sweat when it's hot, we shiver when it's cold. Body is pretty committed to that range. So when you start getting, obviously the further lower you get from that start point, the worse your hypothermia is going to be. And there's actually several different classification systems for how to assess that.
Tell me about these stages of hypothermia. What does it look like as a person goes into hypothermia?
Yeah, so the first stage would be mild, and that's probably what we'll see a lot of at Worlds. My understanding of weather in Atlanta, I mean, there's a lot of factors. We're all kind of talking about it and trying to figure out. Terrain is going to be different. Lap times may be slower. Weather, my understanding of weather is weather in Atlanta can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. So lots of things to try and, manage there when you're getting, when you pit, you're grabbing your gear in between laps, or even when you're packing at home. But hypothermia initially is core body temperature that decreases several degrees in mild. You are shivering. The purpose of shivering is the muscles, when they move, they are generating heat. So you're shivering. It's great. You can warm yourself up as long as the body has energy to keep shivering. If it doesn't have that energy, if you aren't able to replenish your energy stores, then and let's say you continue to be in a cold environment, then things can get progressively worse.
So shivering is a good sign.
If you're cold, shivering is just fine. In fact, I worked medical at so I ran World last year, but in 2016 I worked medical with a neurocheck, and it was like, you guys practice this. So many people come up to me and was like, "How are you doing? Are you cold?" And they'd say, I'm cold now, but I'll be fine once I start running. Well, okay, that's fine. Like, I'm fine with that answer. It's the stuff I researched for this hypothermia. The research came from places like the Wilderness Medical Society or the High Altitude Rescue Society. OCR is the only place I've ever seen where we need to be cool enough to run in a wetsuit and simultaneously warm enough to submerge ourselves in and out of cold water over a 24-hour period. And so when they write these guidelines for how to treat hypothermia, they're not talking about us. They're talking about people that fall through the ice and are found after half an hour. And there's actually a protocol. If somebody is submerged in an avalanche for more than 35 minutes and they have snow in their mouth, you do not start CPR. So we have to take some of what's written and apply it to ourselves as best we can. Most of the hypothermia we're going to see is pretty mild. I would say you're really looking for personality changes. People that are cold become more withdrawn. They don't talk as much. They stop making sense. They start making really kind of poor decisions. And the thing about Tough Mudder is we're always all watching out for each other. So I feel really good about people being out on the course and being cold, being mildly hypothermic, because if somebody were to become worse, there are people, it doesn't take much to recognize that somebody is not doing well.
So the mild hypothermia, we a couple times you said you're okay with that. It's not, if we see someone in mild hypothermia, it's not something to freak out about. It's not something to call the doctor, or is it something we need to watch?
It's hard to say. It's gonna be so I think what people should be thinking about is, what's my plan to resolve the problem? You're gonna shiver, okay? You're gonna shiver. The problem is that as you become colder, you lose your awareness that there's a problem, which is why you're dangerous. When I stand in the way of your progress at that neuro check, I don't actually care that you are limping or that you are shivering. I have to trust that you have the capacity, the energy stores, the glycogen stores, that 2.5 miles from now, when you're as far away from me as you can possibly be, you have the capacity to make good decisions. Shivering in of itself, no, that's really normal. Shivering that goes on and on and on. You're on lap, you're mile 1. You didn't bring any food, and you maybe didn't pack everything because you thought, you didn't bring it. You didn't want it was heavy, whatever. And you continue on, and you continue. So you continue getting in and out of the cold water, and the wind picks up, and the exposure continues, and you still haven't eaten anything. You didn't bring any food, so you still haven't eaten anything. That when the longer you're shivering, the longer it drags out, the worse, the more concerned I become. So I don't mean to blow it off if you're shivering. I would just say it's not initially a panic sign. It's the body doing what the body's supposed to do. But I definitely have pretty solid concerns about people.
You mentioned the medical checks. Tell me about the medical check. During the middle of the night, there's a medical check before you begin each new lap. What does that look like? Right. What are they looking for? What happens when I'm ready to start a new lap and I come up to you at 3 a.m?
Yeah, that's a great question. So each person, I have to be careful here because I can speak for my experience and what I'm looking for, but each person that's out there the way it's been set up in the last 2 years is the folks finish their lap, they go into the pit, they get a warm layer, they get something to eat, they get kicked in the butt by their pit crew, and they get sent back out. So by the time we see them, they've had every opportunity to get warm, get fed, get their new wheels put on and fueled up and whatever. So we literally stand in the way. We are physically in the road before you can leave. The purpose of that check for me is really to, like I said, to make sure you have the capacity to get yourself back to me safely. Limping's fine. Like, I'm not worried about bleeding. Bleeding's even okay. I'm not going to bother. Crying, go ahead, But it's those things in mass or somebody that's demonstrating that they can't continue. So you walk up to me, and first I have to tackle you with a big hug, and then I'm going to say, how are you? But before that even happens, if I've watched you walk toward me and I've watched you not pit, and I did this in 2016, I watched somebody not pit, and I pulled them over right away. Now, at the beginning of the event, people are going as fast as they can, and they want to not stop. They don't want to pit because you get that rolling open of the obstacles. And at that point, sure, blow by your pit. That's fine. That's okay. But I don't know if you remember last year on Facebook, there were a bunch of people that posted, I was on track to get 100 miles, and then I bonked, like completely crashed. I don't know what happened. I didn't stop, and I didn't stop, and I didn't stop. So we're really looking for what's somebody going to be able to do in the future. So I'm going to watch if you pit or not. I'm going to watch you walk up to me. I'm going to probably, one of the things we do is we check for your headlight and your strobe. I'm going to probably act like your mom a little bit and see if you've got a hat and gloves or your leg mitts or whatever. I may check your hands if you have not been taking in enough supplemental sodium and enough salt. If you start to become a little hyponatremic, your hands will swell a little bit. I can see that pretty quickly. You might also feel a little nauseous. If you've taken in too much salt, like you're so afraid to become hyponatremic that you're eating all this salt, your hands also might be a little swollen, but you're actually in worse shape than the guy that didn't. You're both in kind of bad shape. So that's about it. I say, hey, Will, I might have these little index cards, or like, it's something stupid. Like, what state are we in right now? What year is it? All I need to know is that the wheels in your brain are turning. If I have any doubt whether they're turning or not, I'm going to pull you over. I'm going to try and warm you up. I mean, I'm going to, you have to assess each person that's out there. When I was out standing in the road, sometimes with an EMT, sometimes with a doctor, lots of different folks doing those neuro checks. We're all just kind of in and out. And so you kind of have to, it's not anything to worry about, but you do want to be sure before you go up there that you're your best self and that you look around and the people around you look like they can pass.
You talk about people hitting the wall or bonking being a factor in hypothermia. Why is that?
So the term bonking, it's hitting the wall. It's a great marathon term. It's when, energy, glycogen energy is stored in our muscles to a small degree, but mostly in our liver. Our liver has the capacity to store, it depends who you ask, and I'm not really sure how they figure these things out, but let's say 2,000 calories worth of energy. If you if you could go out and you could run without taking in any, replacements. So hitting the wall is when you've depleted everything. There are a couple reasons why you don't get very good warning. In 2016, I believe, I remember watching the video, Austin Azar, towards the end of the event, he went into a water obstacle and just like disappeared. And the image of him sort of very disoriented, sort of creeping out. And then in hindsight, what he said is, I've never hit the wall like that. I think that's what we're going to see. If you're going to fall out, it's going to be right after a water obstacle or right in it. The water steals your body heat 25 times faster than the same temperature if it was the air. When I was signing up for my medical volunteer shift, there were 10 rescue diver positions each shift. So that's a lot of water obstacles. You prevent it by continually eating.
Talk about that. Continually eating. In the pit, on the course?
It depends. I kind of posed that question to the community this morning, and people have, varied approaches to it. And I just say, people find what works for them. I think it's funny. First, we want to talk about what you should be eating. And Dr. Charles Hill, I wanted to read something to you. Dr. Charles Hill is the medical director for the Leadville 100-mile race in Colorado. And they have a safety briefing that's required the night before the event. And for 12 minutes, you can find it on YouTube. It's really hilarious. And that's what he says. He goes, I don't care what kind of paleo, low-carb, tree-hugging bullshit got you here. From this point forward, you need to eat mostly sugar. Simple sugars that are easily converted to energy for your muscles and your brain. You can forget everything else. So it's the sugars, the fast-acting, it's quickly broken down. I would add to that, from a wilderness perspective, add fat in. Because when you're snow camping, the last thing you do before you go to sleep is eat a bunch of peanut butter. It's got a slow burn, and it is going to keep you warm longer. Of course, everything I'm saying to eat, you have to have practice. It has to agree with you. Frequency of eating is going to be another one of those things that's going to be very individualized. One thing I heard on your show a couple of times from your elite athletes, from Doza and from Rhea, was that they had a structured plan of eating on the course. For Doza, it was the hill in Michigan. He said, there's this one hill, I would walk up it, and I took that opportunity to eat. Rhea said the same thing about Texas. And you guys, I guess, were in like a river or something with snakes. And she said that's when she'd be flogging around, and she was already slowed down. So she would eat then. When you're eating a little bit, something that agrees with you, something you're comfortable with, you are slowing down the rate of glycogen depletion. It's like remember math, remember ninth grade math. The boat has a hole in the bottom, and you have a bucket, and you're taking the water out. But how fast do you have to take the bucket out so the boat doesn't sink? It's the same thing. You are still, you're going to be taking on water. You're going to be losing energy. There's no way to keep up with your losses. It's a matter of trying to not bonk.
So at World's Toughest Mudder, people are going to get muddy. They're going to get wet. They're going to get cold. What can runners do to prevent or to minimize their risk of hypothermia?
Excellent. So I have something from Amelia Boone, which just popped up on the Facebook group as well. And rule number 1 for surviving World's Toughest Mudder: if you are cold, it's too late. Whether you like to admit it or not, WTM can be a war of attrition, and the greatest enemy is the cold. Number 1 mistake people make: putting on their wetsuit once they start to get cold. You absolutely must put on your wetsuit while you are still warm. So timing is always an issue. When do I put my wetsuit on? And then thinking about your gear. So from start to finish, there shouldn't be an inch of cotton on your body anywhere. Like not even your bra and underwear shouldn't be cotton. Synthetic layers, polypro, they don't have to be expensive. You can it's the same thing pretty much. You get it at the thrift store. Always think of covering your head, which there's a really nice dive hood that you can slide on and off really easily. I saw a bunch of those Xterra swim caps like discarded on the path or like at obstacles because you have to take it all the way on and off, and so people were losing them. But with a dive hood, you just kind of slide it on and off. So a synthetic layer, a neoprene layer of your choosing, the thickness is going to be something you're going to have to figure out. There is a first-time World's Toughest Mudder group where it's a great place to get some of those, like how thick should my wetsuit be questions figured out. And then a wind layer. So like, even though it's going to get soaking wet, something has some wind protection. A hat and gloves and socks, because I'm your mom, would be great.
What do we do if we see someone on course that is showing those symptoms you talked about for hypothermia? How can we help them?
So at my work, at the urgent care, they don't let the person at the front desk make any decisions. This person comes in and they're like, no, you have to be evaluated by a provider. And my feeling, that's probably true liability-wise, but my feeling is you do know how to recognize a crap sandwich. Gray, I don't care what your ethnic background is, gray is always a bad color on human skin. So if you just have to assess where you are at that exact moment. These guidelines were written to deal with the person that was submerged in freezing water for 30 minutes. How do you handle that patient? We're pretty different. And so you have to watch out for the things that really stand out to you. Like if you're shivering, but you're eating and you're joking around and you're recognizing it, your friends are recognizing you, there's a term obtunded. If somebody looks at you and looks past you and isn't really making a lot of sense, that's probably more than you want to try to deal with, whether you're pit crew, whether you're, in the pit where you can help them, or if you're on the course. There are some situations where something that seems like a really good idea, like a hot shower, is actually a bad idea. So one of the things the body does is it shunts blood to the core. So that's why your extremities get cold. If somebody rewarms too quickly, they get inundated with cold peripheral blood too quickly, and there's something called afterdrop and circumrescue collapse, which are basically you get flooded with cold blood, and people bonk. It's a different kind of bonking, but they can go into a cardiac arrest when they get flooded with that kind of cold. Medical's there to help you, not to disqualify anybody or be difficult in any way. So if you have any concern, like real concerns or doubts, I would always lean towards getting help. But I'd say shivering's fine, and shivering and laughing. So shivering and laughing, that's pretty good. If you're just shivering, that's all right. But you can prevent hypothermia 3 ways. You can prevent it through what you wear. You can prevent it through what you do, so moving, and then through what you eat. And if you can eat some high-fat foods and eat pretty regularly, some people, in some sports, they actually schedule eating, like every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, their watch goes off, and they eat a gel at that point. So I think people just have to decide what they want to do.
So, Molly, what are the signs and symptoms of hypothermia then?
So the Wilderness Medical Society states that as your brain cools down, your personality and communication can quickly change. You may become irritable, confused, apathetic, lethargic, have poor decision-making, and appear obtunded. So when I take that and I break it out and apply it to World's Toughest Mudder, I see irritable. Well, yeah, absolutely. Confused? Probably not. You shouldn't be too terribly confused. Apathetic? Maybe in the later hours, but your drive, you want to keep feeling like you can keep going. Whether you are lethargic, then yes, I would expect. Have poor decision-making. That's the one where that's why we're standing in your way at the NeuroCheck, is to make sure that on the other side of the course, when you're 4 miles in, that you have enough reserves to continue to make decisions. When you hit that wall, should you ever, and I have, it's terrible, your ability to think or move are shot. And it's like a giant vacuum has taken all of your energy all at once, because those glycogen stores have been suddenly completely depleted. You don't get a lot of warning. It happens all at once, and you cannot keep going. At that point, you might want to crawl into the woods and die. Now, the great thing about Tough Mudder is that there are going to be people around you that are going to prevent that from happening. But in the middle of the night, when the course is, there's fewer people out there, that's the concern. Appearing obtunded is just that somebody's pretty out of it. They might be out of it under perfectly normal situations at World's Toughest Mudder. You're kind of looking for extremes.
So bottom line, let's say you're a member of a pit crew and your runner comes in after a lap and you're confident he's hypothermic. How should you treat him? What should you do?
Well, I mean, you're gonna look and see, like, you're gonna ask them, how cold are you, and are they shivering? And those would be pretty normal. The first thing you want to do is protect them from further heat losses. So when they come in, throw something over them, something synthetic like a fleece blanket. Help them, help find, maybe have their extra clothes out so that they can help pick out, or you can just start putting some clothes on them. The second recommendation is to remove wet clothing. Well, we're always in wet clothing. So unless that athlete is done, like truly, the difference between these recommendations for somebody who fell through the ice and the World's Toughest Mudder athlete is somebody who fell through the ice is going to get really cold all at once and then hopefully get rescued. So they're going to be removed from that environment. The World's Toughest Mudder athlete is going to be cold potentially for a very long time, and that's what wears people down. It's that it wears on you. I mean, wouldn't you say? Like it tires you out and it grates on your brain. And that's where it gets really difficult. So it might be the right thing to remove wet clothing and get in that tent and shut down for a while. Only you can make that decision for yourself. If you do get in your tent, you have to make sure that you have an insulating layer between you and the earth. So it could be a foam pad, it could be a little thin camping pad. It doesn't matter, but the earth will continue to steal your heat. And just, if that's what you need to do, then that's how you want to rewarm. Number 3, passive rewarming. They state calorie replacement and protects from heat loss. So you're going to have to feed them. If they're out of it, apathetic, obtunded, the last thing we need you to ask is, what do you want to eat? I remember I was out there last year. I was like, no. Give somebody options. Do you want cup of noodles or do you want cashews and chocolate? You can even make it more simple. You could say, do you want salty or sweet? Like, hold up 2 things. Hold them up. Show them 2 of them. Let them grunt in the general direction of what they would like to eat at that time. But you need to make sure that they're getting some calories on board. And then, as best you can, shove something on them before they skitter away. Cliff bars and chewy granola bars do not mind getting squished in the mud. Even though it's dirty out there, as long as that thing is wrapped and they eat it all at once, there's no reason that they can't carry food. Stinger waffles are 50% their calories are from fat. So that's really going to help with the temperature. And the last step is active rewarming. And that's kind of what would happen in the hospital. That's the person who stops shivering. That's the person that you run over to the med tent and you get the gurney for. That I don't see really happening. They need warm fluids and heat packs and warm air. And I really hope nobody experiences that.
Molly, any last thoughts on how to not die from hypothermia?
I think we should change it. I think it should just be like how to not freeze and maintain your, maintain performance in cold environments. But I'll leave you to that.
I've kind of got a theme going, so yeah. Well.
I know. All right. I would just say that if you do come to the neuro check and I ask you a couple questions and I have concerns, the first thing I'm going to do is feed you. I'm going to stuff you in front of the heater. I'm going to feed you. And you're most likely you're going to turn around and get out of there. I did this once in 2016, and the guy found me online later. I kept him for exactly 5 minutes. I fed him chocolate. I lined up little chocolates on his legs, and I said, after you eat those, you can go. So he ate his chocolates. He found me online. He's like, I didn't pit because my pit was really far away. Nobody was waiting for me. I couldn't be bothered. And I was super tense when you first talked to me. Then I realized you were just trying to warm me up. He's like, I think I continued. He's like, I got better time, more mileage. He's like, I think I probably would have quit after that next lap, but you really helped me out. So I would just say, take a deep breath before you come through the neuro check. I know as an athlete last year, it made me nervous. So it shouldn't have, with everything I know, but if you feel a little nervous, that's okay. But just understand, we're going to try and keep you going.
Special thanks to Molly Kenneth for appearing in this episode. Well done, Molly. If you would like to read more about hypothermia, you can read an article Molly wrote for us over on the OCRreport.com. That is the OCRreport.com. And Molly covers a lot of the same information, but kind of from a different angle, in writing, in text, and you can study it a lot easier than you can with maybe just listening to it in the car or on a run. Don't forget to leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I will see you this weekend. Good luck. Go spend time with someone you love.